All right, parents, here we go again. It's the Ask Dr. Tony episode. This is the Experience Miracles podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, an expert in pediatrics, neurodevelopmental disorders, and drug-free, nervous system-focused healthcare. On this weekly episode, I'll be addressing the top questions on every parent's mind. If there's one thing we love and welcome, it's parents who never stop learning, asking the hard questions, and advocating for your kiddos like none other. So get ready for some real talk, real-life clinical and parenting experience, and real easy to understand answers that will help your family take action and get to that next level of health and healing. You ask, I answer. Let's dive into today's episode. So the question came in from a parent: why would a PX doc suggest 4 times a week for a 2-year-old? Isn't that too much? So here's the direct answer right out of the gates. It always depends. It depends upon the amount of stress and perfect storm triggers and case history, backstory that your 2-year-old went through. And it depends entirely, that set of data would then add up to showing us on our exam, on our neurological insight scans, where we actually measure and quantify and locate the amount, the severity of dysfunction, dysregulation, and subluxation on the nervous system. The care plan frequency, which has 2 elements to it. So the care plan frequency is the most important first part to experience miracles through chiropractic care. If we don't get the care plan right, which I'm going to break it down in its core elements, then it doesn't matter what technique, and there's other levers that really matter that we can talk about, but this will be really a care plan answer. And the care plan has 2 main components to its algebra equation here. Number 1, most important, if you listen at all to our platform and podcast, you know how much everything is about the sequence. If you don't get A right, you don't have a chance to get B right. If you don't get all the way down to the real root cause, you don't have a chance to get full, complete healing, right? If you're only on the surface or 1 layer deep. So this answer too, why would a PX doc suggest 4 times a week for a 2-year-old? Isn't that too much? The initial component of a care plan has to do with initial frequency. The second component of a care plan that is very important for our PX docs to really get right, and we train literally in their 80-hour certification course, which, by the way, is post-doctorate. So this is on top of really brilliant, really advanced doctors already, and then advanced training. And then they have to pass that course, and then they have to keep training. They have to literally be trained with us live every single month, doing case reviews, updated research, neuroscience, updated clinical protocols. So to be a PX doc on the directory, you've got to be dialed in from A to Z. And the first thing we train them on, like a third of the certification program, is all about the care plan. And it's just these 2 levers. Like if you say it out loud, it's like just these 2 levers. Just like it kind of hits that feeling, which sparks this question. They're just a 2-year-old, right? But there's a whole lot to unpack here. And so the care plan is what moves mountains to make miracles. And the initial frequency is the initial dosage. Now, I can't stand the word dosage in a vacuum because we are literally helping kids in a drug-free, root-cause, nervous system-focused way, but it's a relatable term for everybody to be able to pick up on. So what our job is upon intake is to dive deep into the case history. We call it CSI, chiropractic, kind of neuroscience, crime scene investigation. So we go all the way back to pre-fertility, fertility, pregnancy, maternal distress, birth and intervention. Was that in there? We get into the weeds, get into the details. How were they as an infant? How was their latch? How was their breastfeeding? How was their sleeping? How was their digestion? How's their immune system? How's their motor planning? Nobody does a case history with the depth that we do as PX docs. That's the first set of data we need to figure out what the care plan is going to be. So what we've done with PX is we've actually built what's called a PX care plan builder, and it is entirely based upon neuroscience. It's based upon the science of the perfect storm and nervous system dysregulation, birth trauma, and all the things. It's based upon the science of neuroplasticity and neurological healing and neurodevelopment, and it mixes 2 things together. 40% of it is the case history. And what we're figuring out as we dive deep is we're figuring out how early stress, nervous system dysfunction, sympathetic dominance, and what's called subluxation likely hit your child's nervous system and threw it off track. Then the scans, 60% of our care plan builder has to do with our exam, with the technology and the analysis, the thermal, the EMG, and the HRV. So it's very diagnostic. It's very advanced in this way. Now, I want to dive deep on the first part because this is really the essence of our work. This is where most chiropractors, if they say they're a pediatric and a family chiropractor, or if they say they're a nervous system focused chiropractor, and they actually only recommend 1 to 2 times a week for most kids who are having some sort of health challenges anywhere, honestly, even things like chronic ear infections and colic nowadays. And we never make a care plan based upon a condition, by the way. We can't, this is not medicine. This is not treatment and cure. We can't say a child has autism, so they get this care. Nothing is cookie cutter. So actually answering this question is a bit difficult because I don't have this particular kiddo's case history and scans and exam in front of me, but I know the context. And so I can answer it with depth and with certainty and with clarity. What we now know is that many infants probably, and I don't want to say this out loud, but it's just clinically true. We actually, about 20 to 30% of our infants under the age of 1, we now in our clinic at PWC, we will adjust them every day. 5 to 6 times a week for the first 2 weeks because their nervous system. So I want to introduce this concept to get everyone to understand why the dosage of chiropractic, not the actual adjustment, not the physicality of the adjustment. In fact, it's the opposite. I'll go to that next. We need to fight fire with fire in terms of the frequency. We need to be up front with a higher dosage because kids today are more sick, more struggling, more subluxated, more early. So the perfect storm isn't just toxins. The perfect storm shows up. Kids are already having their nervous system dysregulated and subluxated in utero during what's called fetal development. We've done some episodes about this. There's some incredible papers and articles we've written about this. And all of those episodes and papers are based upon our clinical experience and some incredible research with what's called HRV monitoring through mom and through baby. And so we know that our babies, our kids today, and this isn't the good news I get to deliver. The good news I get to deliver is the fact that 4 times a week in neurotonal adjusting is the thing that will actually get your child out of the storm. So if you get a care plan with that high of a frequency, then your child's stuck in the storm. And that's the deciding factor as to the dosage we're going to begin with and then the duration over time. And the more early that a child went through these stressors, then we introduce a term that actually my co-lead doc at our practice, Dr. Matt Hill, who will be coming on the podcast on the regular here later on this year, because he's brilliant with teaching this stuff. He's a special needs dad to his miracle man, Micah, so he's got the same frame I do. He's a neuroscience nerd, second, and a clinician, second. He's a father first, so he'll speak from that way, too, when he comes to help us out on the podcast. And if you followed a bunch of other stuff, you see him all the time. But he coined this term when I was teaching these concepts to him way back. And he just brought this term to give it a better relatability for doctors and for parents. It's called percentage of life subluxated. And if we know that it was a high stress fertility and pregnancy journey, and there was a lot of birth intervention, and then your 2-year-old was colicky and fussy and constipated and subluxated, and then most importantly, again, it's not just case history, it's also the insight scans. And then if the thermal scan and the HRV, and sometimes a 2-year-old is too young to get an EMG, the surface EMG, but we get them oftentimes in our practice and measure them in that way anyways. So that depth of stress, that percentage of life subluxated through their case history, and then the depth of dysfunction, dysregulation, and subluxation on the insight scans as well, those all have metrics. We call it neurometrics. Another dad coined that term. Shout out to Chris. And so these neurometrics show the depth of subluxation for your child, and we have to be able to match that. And it's called percentage of life subluxated. So the third factor to bring into this, so we're up against it. We know that when kiddos get a high frequency care plan, it always is matching a high stress case history, and it's always matching a high stress set of stress and dysfunction on the scans. So we've got to be able to handle that. And then the third element to talk about with this is neurological healing, neuroplastic restoration, reorganization, which we call that's what we call our care. It has to not only repair, so that's another R word we kind of bring into this. There's repair, then restoration, then reorganization that has to happen into that child's brain and nervous system through this healing. Well, guess what that child's brain and nervous system is doing every single minute, hour, and day, growing and developing at the most rapid rate. So getting a 2-year-old, this is where the math with the chronological age And it even took me years in practice to really understand this in full. So as a parent, trust me, I fully understand the context of this question. Why would a PX doc recommend 4 times a week for a 2-year-old? Isn't that too much? It's not at all. We think about, they're so little, how much stress, how much dysfunction, how much, how off course could they be developmentally? Well, a baby's brain develops more neurons, actually in the first couple of years of life, they develop more neurons and more synapses, so more growth and more development forward in a minute than we do in a day as an adult. So the concept I can bring to life to get this last element to really answer this question is we get to repair, restore, recalibrate, reorganize these 2-year-old and these kiddos' nervous systems while it's growing and going 180 miles per hour down the road on the freeway. So we're trying to repair the engine. We're trying to repair the wiring. We're trying to repair the electric, component of this whole thing while it's screaming down the road, continuing to grow and go and develop. And one of the most stressful things that the body goes through is growth and development. It stresses an already distressed, dysfunctional system. So what we learned through our early years of building these PX Docs clinical protocols is that the most important first thing to get right is the initial frequency of the care plan. And what I was taught when I first got into work is, they're kids. Start once a week, twice a week. They're not adults. They haven't had all these injuries. Because if we think about it from a physical nature, yes, they haven't been through as much, sitting at a desk, old injuries, whatever it may be. But that's physical chiropractic. That's biomechanical chiropractic. This is neurologically focused chiropractic. And so it's all about neurological rewiring. And if we understand that on one end of the chronological spectrum, our kiddos have been stressed and subluxated way longer than the pediatrician or anybody. Because remember, what did the pediatrician tell you about all the challenges they were going through? Don't worry, it's normal, they'll grow out of it. No, that was a sign of neurological dysfunction the whole time. Neurological injury, neurological dysfunction. So that distress has massive momentum on us. Subluxation isn't static. It gets worse over time. So what we have to do first, and I should have said this term already, we actually have to play catch up. First, we have to close the gap between their neurodevelopmental age. Dr. Matt actually just did a great video about this. We should actually repurpose it on the podcast about brain age versus body age. And so there's neurodevelopmental age. And when a kiddo is subluxated, vagus nerve dysfunction, nervous system dysregulation, what happens is neurodevelopment and brain development, nervous system development compared to their actual age, 2, 3, whatever it may be, there's a huge gap there. So the reason we start with such a high frequency is to, on one hand, repair and I know that's a heavy word, but we got to repair the damage that was done to the nervous system. And we have to do it while it's screaming down the road 180 miles per hour. So we have to catch up. We have to close this gap that has been opened up between their health and their development, right? And so the initial frequency, I am so glad this question came through, and I pray that my answer here today is giving everyone clarity as to why PX docs recommend a higher dosage and initial frequency of care. And you know what else we do? We tend to recommend a lot longer duration of chiropractic care as well. So this is where we are outliers from the rest of the profession and other similar professions as well. But that's also why we get outlier results, because we know how the nervous system works. We know the depth and the layers deep that this dysfunction is, all the way back to fertility, pregnancy, labor, delivery, colic, difficulty latching, all constipation, chronic ear infections. We got to go back and fix all that, clear all that, catch up to all that. And then we also know how neurodevelopment works. In a perfect world, we would just hit pause on your kid's growth and development while we did our work, right? While we got in there and did our restoration and repair and our adjustments. It is so hard. Okay, I'll finish with this because it's real and it'll help put a bow on this. 2-year-olds to about 10 to 12-year-olds, they're harder to get better. They take longer. Let me say it this way. They take longer to get better. It's a more bumpy road with a lot more ups and downs and ins and outs and roller coaster. We talked about that, plateaus, regressions, and progression, all kind of mixed together. When from toddler stage till about teenager stage, I'll say it that way, forget the ages. From toddler stage to teenager stage is actually, that middle ground is the toughest work we do in pediatrics. Infants, you can get ahead of it. You can get ahead of a lot of their motor development. Obviously, their brain and their autonomics are developing at a rapid pace, but they're not so motor dependent yet, like a 2-year-old would be. So particularly to this question. And then it's going to sound too simple when I say it, but it's as real as rain, and it's true with the nervous system and how the brain and the body connect. Teenagers and adults get better faster because they're done growing. They are literally physically done growing, and even their neuroplasticity, the rate at which their brain develops as well, so growth and maturation of the brain and the nervous system, the rate is slower later on in life. So does a teenager have more years of stress and dysfunction? So that first equation we kick this off with, yes, that works against an older kid, but what works for an older kid or a young adult is the fact that they're done growing. And again, you may hear that and go, oh my gosh, physical growth has that much to do with nervous system healing? Yes, because the neurosensory motor, its structure, the brain and the body are so connected together. So as the body continues to go and grow, the brain has to keep up. What if the brain is distressed and dysfunctional? It doesn't keep up well. And the brain is growing and maturing and creating more neurons and more synapses, millions of them per day as well. And so again, the take home, say it one more time for clarity, the reason that kids, even as young as an infant or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, often need 4 times, our intensive program is actually twice a day, 6 days a week. So they're getting 12 adjustments for 24 for the first 2 weeks. That's for epilepsy, level 3 autism, our real tough cases that come in through. And most of our docs are trained on intensive protocols to do them at their offices too. Maybe not all of them are as experienced as obviously we are with our brick and mortar practice outside Chicago. But that's how that works. It's percentage of life stressed mixed with the fact that they're still growing and developing at such a rate. And so in order to be able to do our work with the greatest clinical effectiveness, we have to take all this neurometrics and neuroplasticity in mind, and we need to be able to match that to the care plan. Once we get the care plan dialed in, now it has to do with what's called finding the exact major subluxations, adjusting the right places, not adjusting where we're not needing to adjust, and then choosing the right technique. So there's additional, what we kind of call levers that we train our doctors on that are super, super important clinically to get results. And those are also differentiating things compared to PX docs with any other kind of chiropractic. Vividly compared to functional neurology, where they don't usually even adjust. They're just working on primitive reflexes and lasers and whatnot. And so this is essential to get right first. The care plan. If we break the care plan down, it's essential to get the initial frequency. If we go too low, if we were to just start a kiddo at 1 to 2 times a week who actually needs 4 times a week or needs 5-6 times a week, we wouldn't get neurological breakthrough release to happen in the first place to be able to then start to make the changes of reorganization and recalibration. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. Do you have a question that you would like to submit? Either send it to support@pxdocs.com with the subject Ask Dr. Tony, or head on over to our socials @PXDocs, where you can submit your question in our stories every single week. Every kid counts and every family counts, so let's leave no questions left unanswered. If you loved this episode and you want to help us reach more kids, we would so appreciate if you left a review and a rating on your favorite platform. God bless, be well. We'll see you on the next one.